So, in recent videos, I've been talking about sports science and its role in paddling and training for paddling. And we've talked about the energy systems, we've talked about VO2 max, and we've talked about lactate threshold. Um, I wanted to delve in a little bit deeper to sports science and talk about a way that it can be applied to help an athlete race better in a distance race. So I'm not talking so much about helping an athlete race better by helping them train better. I'm actually talking about using sports science to better understand um, your capabilities and the physiological impact of the effort that you're giving, and how you can improve your race performance through that knowledge. So let's consider an athlete that's racing in a distance race. And let's, for the sake of argument, say that it's a longer distance race, like a Chattajack if you're in North America, which is, for those that don't know the race, it's a 50-kilometer race. Takes about 5 hours to anywhere up to 8 hours, depending on your level. And if you're in Europe, let's consider a race like the 11 City Tour or a stage of the 11 City Tour. And for those that aren't familiar with that race, it's a 200 plus kilometer race that's over 5 days in 5 separate stages, with each stage being anywhere from 30 to 50K long. So it's an extended effort distance race where it's going to be really important that you pace it well, but where there's going to be lots of opportunities in the race to go harder for short durations, have time to recover, and then go harder again. Okay? So, and then let's also, in this scenario, have an athlete racing that has a heart rate monitor mounted on their board in a place where they can see it. So they can see their heart rate data while they're paddling. They can actually know what their heart rate is at any given time in their race. Okay. And I'm not sure about the 11 City Tour, but in a race like Chattajack, there are no rules like there are at the ICF where you can't have a GPS on your board or a heart rate monitor on your board or whatever. You're allowed to have that information. So the athlete is doing this distance race. They have access during the race to all this information. So they can benefit from what they know about their body and their heart rate from what lactate testing will tell them. So let's talk about, right now we know that determining your lactate threshold tells you the point at which your metabolism switches from primarily aerobic metabolism, producing the energy required for muscle contraction, to anaerobic metabolism. And if we plot a curve with that data, we'll see that the curve is fairly flat, representing a low level of lactate increases, heart rate is increasing. And then finally, there's a critical heart rate where lactate production really starts to increase. And that point where it really starts to increase is the lactate threshold. So let's say, for example, that if for a given athlete, their lactate threshold heart rate is 168 beats a minute. Ideally, this athlete wants to race at 168 beats a minute or just under, right? Like just under, like 165 beats a minute, as close to that 168 threshold as possible without exceeding the threshold. And that means that they can work aerobically. Now, if they don't have the benefit of a heart rate monitor, so they can't see their heart rate information while they're training, they'll know that in a long race, they don't want to go too hard. They don't want to go above their threshold, start producing large amounts of lactate, and then be in trouble because they've got all this lactate in their system. Remember, lactic acid is a limiting factor. So chances are they're going to be overly cautious, and they're going to intentionally be careful and probably paddle well below 168 beats a minute. They might be paddling at 160, 158, 155, but they're well below the effort that they could be giving and still be paddling aerobically, which means they're leaving effort on the table, right? Like they're not going as hard as they could aerobically because they're being cautious and they're unaware that they have a little bit more room, a little bit more effort to give without going anaerobic. So the first benefit that you get from knowing what your anaerobic threshold is that you can pace your race more effectively. You can give the maximal aerobic effort that is possible for you to give without going anaerobic, right? And if you don't have that knowledge, chances are you're going to be overly cautious and you're going to leave some effort that you could have given on the table that you haven't used it, which means you'll be going slower. Okay? But let's take things a step further. Let's imagine that instead of just doing, when you were doing your lactate threshold testing, instead of just doing this step test where you did progressively harder efforts, measuring your lactate accumulation at the end of each effort, figuring out where your threshold was, let's take the use of that lactate analyzer a step beyond that. Let's imagine that we, in this distance race, we're going to do a series of harder pieces within this distance race. And those of you that have done a distance race well will understand that it's not a simple question of doing your start, settling into your traveling pace, maintaining your traveling pace for the entire race, picking it up at the finish, and then you're done. A distance race is a much more complex thing than that. You do your start, you settle into your traveling pace, but there's all kinds of places during a race where you've got to go hard for 30 seconds, a minute, 45, a minute 30, whatever. You've got to go harder for periods of time, either to chase down a draft train and get on a wash, to try to drop another competitor, to catch back up to a draft train if you've fallen off the wash, to catch a bump or to, to get, inside position on a turn or something like that. There's all kinds of reasons that you might want to go hard on occasions throughout the course of a long distance race, say like a 4 or 5 hour race. And it's really important to know what the cost of that harder effort is. So imagine testing, using your lactate analyzer to test a series of harder efforts and to understand how much lactate you're accumulating if you go 30 seconds really hard, 45 seconds really hard, a minute really hard, a minute 30 really hard. See how much lactate you accumulate above the normal lactate that you're accumulating for your long distance sub-threshold effort. So what I would suggest is if I wanted to find that information out, I would do my testing where I would go for, say, 15 minutes at sub-threshold, just sub-threshold. And then I would go harder for 30 seconds. And immediately I would stop and get tested. It's a really quick process if you've got somebody who can collect the sample for you and then put it in the analyzer. And then you can keep paddling again. And then the next time you test, you might want to test for 45 seconds. And then the next time you test, you might want to test for that hard piece being a minute or a minute and 30 seconds. Each time you're doing it after paddling as you would in a distance race at your safe race pace, right, for an extended period of time, 10 or 15 minutes, and then you're going to do this pickup, this sprint, and you're going to see how much lactate you accumulate. Why is that important? Well, you want to know what the cost of a 30-second hard effort is in the midst of a long distance race. You want to know what the cost of a 45-second effort is. How much more do you pay in terms of accumulating lactate to go 45 seconds instead of 30 seconds hard? You want to know how much more a minute costs you. Like, how much more lactate are you accumulating as you extend that hard effort? Because you want to know during the course of a race what the damage is if you decide that you need to go hard for a period of time and you go for a minute and 15 seconds rather than 45 seconds, right? If you know that a minute and 15 seconds means that you accumulate a ton of lactate, you might not want to go for a minute and 15 seconds in the race. You might want to limit the length of a hard section in your distance race to a minute, because you know that extra 15 seconds is going to put you into a danger zone of accumulated lactate. But you won't have an idea of any of this if you're not collecting some data. So you're running these tests and you're collecting data and you're understanding how much lactate you accumulate for hard efforts on top of your traveling pace, your distance race traveling pace, how much lactate you're accumulating for various lengths of these hard efforts. So you understand what the cost of these efforts are within a race. Okay. And just having that understanding is going to put you at a great advantage, because it reduces the risk of you making either a critical error and going too hard for too long and then getting into trouble with too much accumulated lactate. And it also prevents you from underutilizing your ability to go hard and going for, being afraid to go, say, for example, longer than 30 seconds when you really could be capable of going 45 seconds or a minute, right? Knowing this information could give you the confidence to know that you could stretch your effort out from 30 seconds to 45 seconds to even a minute without paying a huge price, right? You need to know that information. That's going to help you when you're racing. The other piece of information that we want to know is, after we do these hard pieces and we accumulate more lactate, our lactate increases. Our lactate's going to spike up. If we go, we're going at our race pace, our safe race pace, our subthreshold race pace for 15 minutes, and then we lay down a really hard 90-second piece, and we find that our lactate climbs considerably because that 90-second piece is going to be anaerobic. What we want to know now is that if we accumulate that lactate, how long does it take us to get back to the level we were at, our lactate back to the level it was at before we did that piece? In other words, how long do we need to recover, or how long does it take to recover at sub-threshold pace, like back to our race traveling pace? How long does it take to recover, to clear all that lactate so that we can go and do it again, right? We need to understand that as well. And so you could do a series of tests where you, once you know how much lactate you're accumulating, say in a 90-second hard piece on top of your race pace, you could then drop back to your race pace, your traveling pace, and you could maintain that for 5 minutes and then do another test and see how much your lactate level had reduced. You could do it for 10 minutes to see how much more your lactate level would have reduced. You could do it for 15 minutes to see if your lactate is now back to the level it was before you did your pickup, right? Lactic acid is produced in the muscles as a result of anaerobic metabolism, and it's taken from the muscles. It's basically dumped into the bloodstream. When the blood dumps off oxygen and nutrients to the muscle, it's picking up lactic acid from the muscle, and it's now in the bloodstream. And in the bloodstream, it gets carried to your liver, where it's cleaned out of your bloodstream, and we call that cleared. And the majority of that lactic acid is actually converted to glycogen and can be used for fuel for future efforts. There's only a little bit of it that is just expelled from the body. So you want to understand, how long does it take for that lactate in your blood to get to the liver, to get cleared from the bloodstream, so that your lactate returns to a normal, safe level, so that you could then go again hard for 90 seconds or whatever it is that you determine is a safe period of time for you to do your big burst, right? And so, if you're clever about it and you have access to somebody with an analyzer or a coach who's willing to do this for you, you and your coach can work together to create a test protocol to gain all of this information that's going to help somebody who's really serious about giving their maximal possible effort in a distance race every advantage that they can possibly think of towards doing that, right? Understanding how much lactate you produce when you go hard, and understanding how much time you need for that lactate to clear so that you can do it again for the same amount of time is critically important if you want to be the best you can possibly be in a distance race, right? It's so much more than just knowing how hard you can go without producing extreme amounts of lactate, like just paddling at your threshold. It's so much more than that, because races aren't just steady state affairs where you do your start, you settle into your pace, and then you do your finish at the end. There's all kinds of reasons that you're going to need to go harder for periods of time in a race. And then if you're lucky too, you're going to have periods of time in a long distance race where you can go a lot easier too, if you have an opportunity to draft. But understanding what the cost is of going harder is really important. It's critically important to an athlete that wants to maximize their abilities in a race. And lactate testing can tell you what the cost is. And then it can tell you how much time you need to recover from that high level of lactate that you incurred as a result of the hard burst that you gave. So that's just an example of how sports science can be applied very easily to helping an athlete develop a better understanding of their race abilities, and helping them be able to actually race better. And that's totally separate than how, understanding what your lactate threshold is and how that can help you in your training by helping you better understand your training zones, right? There's so much more that you can get from this element of sports science, lactate threshold, and very easily. That's my little discussion for today. I was thinking about this while I was paddling the other day, and I just thought that this is something that I can do this summer. I can test my buddy Tim, who will be doing a lot of distance races this year. He's the record holder for Chattajack. He's a 3-time winner. He's going to do Molokai to Oahu this year, and he's also going to do the 11th City Tour. So he's got a busy summer ahead in distance racing. And I was thinking, I have the ability to help him better understand what the impact of going harder is going to be in all of these races, and better have a better understanding of what the costs are going to be when he does go harder. And that will help him, I think, better maximize his potential and give a better effort in all these races. So I thought I'd share that with you. It's to me, it's something that's really, really interesting. It should be of interest to anyone who's really serious about their performance. And if it's something that I can help you with if you're interested in it. Let me know in the comments what you think, And I'll talk to you again next time. Happy paddling.